I'm a big fan of open world games. Breath of the Wild opened my eyes to the genre, and since playing it in 2017, I've played many other open world games that have impressed me. Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima, and Spider-Man, just to name a few, have demonstrated how open world games can capture intriguing mystery, breathtaking beauty, detailed world building, and engaging movement. And with two massive open world games being released earlier this year, the topic of map markers is on my mind. I loved Horizon Forbidden West, but I do have some critiques regarding elements of the game's design that feel outdated. When I refer to map markers, I'm talking mainly about indicators on the map of where there's something to explore. Question marks might be the most common way that these indicators appear. Horizon and Ghost of Tsushima are both games that use question marks to communicate to the player the location of something developers intend for them to find. And often, while these map markers are helpful for completion and strategic navigation, they can hinder the flow of natural exploration in ways that we may not realize. Let's take a look at 3 ways map markers can cause issues in the experience of exploration, and how games like Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, and even Ghost of Tsushima can avoid them.
Ugh, water in my boots.
The first problem that may be caused by map markers stems from the reason developers use them in the first place. Map markers are intended to mark noteworthy spots, which can be very helpful. However, this can lead players and even the developers to believe that only the important locations will be marked. This leads to issues on a design front. Developers are prone to put much less attention into making the spaces in between the marked locations feel detailed and alive. Additionally, this is an issue for players, as they come to expect those spaces in between to be worthless and not valuable to explore. Horizon Forbidden West, for example, has very few things of note that are not marked on the map. Almost all the side quests and errands that Aloy takes on start in settlements and towns, and there are next to no NPCs that you run into while exploring the world outside of these places. Greenshine, which is a resource used for upgrading weapons, can be found around the world in random locations, but this on its own doesn't add a sense of fullness to the landscape. Rather than naturally following where my curiosity led me, the further I got in the game, the more I ran from question mark to question mark, just trying to discover everything for the sake of completion. I knew that there wouldn't be anything worth my time between point A and B besides some small loot pickups or maybe a few stray machines that weren't at previously marked machine sites. I had to go out of my way to stop this boring loop of map marker hopping and truly just explore. And while the map is full of worthwhile things, I can't help but wonder if I would have stumbled onto many of these locations through true exploration if they weren't marked, rather than making a beeline through the boring and uninhabited areas. The problem isn't the amount of content in the game's world, but when the game explicitly tells you where it's worth going, players like me might tend to only care about those areas. It makes it harder to enjoy the journey rather than just the destination. Few would argue the claim that Breath of the Wild is a masterclass in exploration-based game design, and one of the things it does so well is making every inch of the world feel valuable. The main points of interest that the player comes across in the game are shrines, towns, and Korok seeds, none of which show up on the map until the player reaches them. Restricting the knowledge of the player creates a curiosity driven by the idea that anywhere they explore, they might find something of value. Even outside of these locations, there are ruins, enemy camps, bosses, and traveling NPCs that aren't marked on the map, that are still valuable. Shatterback Point is one of the most interesting spots on the map. It has the highest diving location in the game, a Lionel boss, and an incredible view. Despite all the detail and work that went into crafting the location, there's no shrine or big marker on the map that notes it as a point of interest. This is the perfect example of how the philosophy of using minimal markers on the map leads to a more detailed and engaging world that feels worth exploring even when there's nothing explicitly telling the player where to go. I find few things in media more exciting than surprises. And I don't just mean random shock factor moments or meaningless twists, but rather surprises that feel earned and meaningful. And while that description mostly applies to narrative-driven media, I think it can also partially apply to exploration in video games. Particularly, I think finding surprising locations while exploring can not only feel earned by the player discovering it on their own, but also meaningful because of the detail in the location itself. Map markers often take away the joy of stumbling onto something exciting, conditioning the player on what to expect and telling them exactly where it will be. Maps like Forbidden Wests don't show the landscape in enough detail to make out points of interest without the markers. If the map was detailed enough, it could give the player a vague idea that there was something to be investigated, and still surprise them when they see what it is. Instead, the markers are often the only indication, and instead of environmental clues drawing the player's focus, the markers do all the work and remove a lot of the curiosity. Elden Ring is a shining example of a living, breathing world that is truly surprising at every turn. In the first few areas of the game alone, the player can stumble upon spontaneous battles, mighty bosses, catacombs, merchants, NPCs, convoys, ambushes, and enemies surveying the land on horseback. Almost none of these things are marked in the map beforehand, and very few of them become marked later on. These are all surprising events, and surprises play an essential role in creating a relationship between the player and the world. A player's relationship with the world is one of the most important aspects of a game that is supposed to be enjoyable to explore. When this relationship is created, players stop thinking about the map in terms of geography and start thinking about it in terms of events and experiences. Instead of remembering a road for its physical geography, the player remembers it for their encounter with a massive carriage pulled by two giants and ushered by a group of soldiers. Instead of remembering navigation, the player remembers stories, and those stories are what make the experience of exploration feel complete and satisfying. One final issue that map markers can cause is a direction of focus away from the player's immediate surroundings and towards their minimap or compass. While playing Forbidden West, I found myself spending so much time staring at the compass at the top of the screen as I navigated, rarely using environmental landmarks or knowledge of the world to get around. The compass told me exactly what direction I needed to run in a straight line to get to my destination, instead of my path being a dynamic adventure that takes detours and turns. This direction of focus to a spot on the screen also takes away from the environment around the player. Forbidden West is one of the most beautiful games of the generation so far, and time spent not enjoying the incredible locations and lighting seems like a waste. While playing, I could become so fixated on the next destination that I had to remind myself to slow down and observe just how wonderful the game looked. Even in games that aren't as graphically impressive like Breath of the Wild, running in a straight line while looking at the minimap would lead the player to miss out on so many things in the world around them. The world is dense with details, and those details are easily lost when focus is shifted away. Ghost of Tsushima is perhaps one of the most innovative open-world games in the navigation department. Despite being a last-gen game, its exploration and world have a myriad of advantages over games like Horizon Forbidden West. Ghost's wind mechanic, however, is commonly regarded as one of its greatest strengths. The game doesn't use waypoints, minimaps, or a compass. Instead, when you set a location as your destination, the wind in the world around you blows towards it, carrying leaves and flowers in a beautiful swirl as the player explores on foot or on horseback. Swiping upward on the touchpad creates a new gust, which the player can trigger anytime they need to check where they're heading. This wind mechanic can also guide players to collectibles they haven't found yet, removing the need for excess markers crowding the map, telling the player where to go. This allows the player to refocus on the world around them, enjoy the natural environments, and travel with a flexible route that encourages curiosity and discovery. While I've discussed in detail some of the shortcomings with exploration in Horizon Forbidden West, I do think it's a genuinely great game. It has a strong focus on narrative, fantastic combat, and immersive world building. But I do think the devs at Guerrilla Games can learn a thing or two from Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, and Ghost of Tsushima. That's all for today's video. I'd love to hear what you think about the topic or other aspects of game design that you feel are overlooked. Leave a like if you enjoyed and dislike if you didn't. Thanks for watching and have a pleasant day.